23 children were found locked in the basement of a Georgia plantation in 1864. Each one bore the same distinctive traits: high cheekbones, pale green eyes, and auburn hair streaked with gold. Union soldiers forcing open the iron doors of the Thornhill estate in Burke County discovered these children huddled together in the dark, some as young as 4, others nearing adolescence. What the eldest, a girl of 13, told the officers made veteran soldiers physically ill. "Mistress says we are her legacy. We cannot leave because we are her blood." Military records from the 34th Massachusetts Infantry mention the incident just once, in a confidential letter buried in regimental archives for more than a century. Local histories of Burke County omit the Thornhill estate completely, as if the plantation and its mistress never existed. But they did exist. What Catherine Thornhill created in those 16 years between her husband's death and the arrival of federal troops stands as one of the most disturbing chapters in American history, a systematic breeding program designed to create generations of enslaved people who could never escape, because they were genetically tied to their owner. Before we continue with the story of Catherine Thornhill and the nightmare she built in rural Georgia, I need you to do something. If this story is making your skin crawl, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel dives deep into the darkest corners of American history, the stories they don't teach in schools, the secrets buried in courthouse basements and forgotten military records. I want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment telling me your state or city. Are you near Burke County, Georgia? Does your town have secrets like this buried in its past? Let's find out together. Now, let's return to where it all began. To a cold February morning in 1847, when a young widow inherited a dying plantation and conceived a plan that would haunt Georgia for generations. The winter Catherine Danforth Thornhill buried her husband was the coldest Burke County had seen in 20 years. The Thornhill estate sprawled across 1,700 acres of red clay soil, 7 miles southwest of Waynesboro, the county seat. In 1847, Burke County was cotton country, though not as prosperous as the Black Belt regions further west. The soil here was tired, overworked by decades of single-crop farming. Plantations that had flourished in the 1820s were struggling by the 1840s, caught between falling cotton prices and rising costs. The Mexican War had drawn away laborers, and talk of territorial expansion split communities along bitter lines. Thornhill Estate had once been among the region's more successful properties. Catherine's late husband, Jonathan Thornhill, had inherited it from his father in 1838 with 42 enslaved workers, adequate equipment, and manageable debt. But Jonathan was a poor manager and an enthusiastic gambler. By the time a winter fever took him in February 1847, the estate was mortgaged to the hilt. The fields produced barely enough to feed the workers, and creditors circled like buzzards. Catherine was 28 when she became a widow. She had married Jonathan at 19, a strategic match arranged by her father, Theodoric Danforth, a prominent Augusta merchant. The Danforths were old Georgia money, descended from settlers who arrived in the 1730s. Catherine had been educated by private tutors, spoke French passably well, and was raised expecting to manage a substantial household. What she had not expected was to inherit a failing plantation, crushing debts, and a 16-year-old stepson who looked at her with something close to hatred. Richard Thornhill was Jonathan's son from his first marriage. His mother died giving birth to him in 1831, and Jonathan remarried 5 years later. Richard had never warmed to Catherine, seeing her as an interloper who had replaced his real mother. He was a sullen, bookish boy who spent most of his time in the estate's small library, avoiding both his stepmother and the practical work of running a plantation. Catherine found him weak, impractical, and far too sentimental about the enslaved workers. He had once suggested they be taught to read, an idea so dangerous Catherine forbade him from ever mentioning it again. The plantation itself mirrored its decline. The main house was a 2-story whitewashed brick structure with 6 columns across the front portico, built in 1805 in the Federal style. Paint peeled from the window frames, and the roof leaked in 3 places. Inside, furniture was a mix of inherited pieces from Jonathan's family and cheaper replacements bought after the good pieces were sold to pay gambling debts. Behind the main house stood the kitchen, smokehouse, dairy, and overseer's cottage, all in similar disrepair. Further back, beyond a line of live oaks draped with Spanish moss, lay the quarters where the enslaved population lived. In 1847, 31 people remained on the property, 11 men, 13 women, and 7 children. 16 others had been sold over the previous 3 years to satisfy Jonathan's creditors. Those who remained knew more sales were coming. Fear hung over the quarters like fog over the Savannah River. Catherine spent the first month after Jonathan's death in controlled fury. She met with the estate's lawyer, Ambrose Talbot, who laid out her options bluntly: sell the property and remaining workers to settle the debts, perhaps having enough left to live modestly in Augusta under her father's roof, or find a way to make the plantation profitable again, which Talbot considered unlikely, given the cotton market and the estate's depleted resources. Neither option was acceptable to Catherine. Returning to Augusta meant admitting failure, living as a dependent spinster in her father's house, forever marked as the widow who couldn't hold her inheritance. But she also knew traditional plantation management wouldn't save Thornhill Estate. The land was worn out, the equipment old, the remaining enslaved workers too few to work the cotton fields profitably, and she had no money to buy more. During one sleepless night, poring over the estate's account books by candlelight, Catherine conceived her plan. The idea came with the cold logic of desperation. If she couldn't afford to buy workers, she would breed them, but not in the haphazard way most plantations did, offering minor incentives for couples to have children and waiting 15 years for those children to become productive laborers. No, Catherine envisioned something far more systematic and controlled. She would create a population of workers biologically tied to the estate, who could never be sold because they were her own descendants, who would feel instinctive loyalty to the plantation because it was literally in their blood. The plan was monstrous. But to Catherine, it was also elegant. She was still young enough to bear children. She would select the strongest, healthiest men among the enslaved population and conceive children with them. These children would be raised knowing their parentage, given slightly better treatment to ensure loyalty, and when mature, paired with enslaved women to produce the next generation. Within 20 years, Catherine calculated, she could have a workforce of 50 or more, all bound to Thornhill Estate by ties deeper than legal ownership. She began keeping a journal to work out the details. This was no diary of personal feelings. Catherine was far too practical. Instead, she created what she called her cultivation records, filled with calculations, observations, and plans. She wrote in a simple substitution cipher, replacing key words with innocuous agricultural terms. Children became seedlings. The men she selected became rootstock. Pregnancies were plantings. The journal's pages were covered with diagrams resembling livestock breeding charts, because that was essentially what they were. Catherine's first selection was a man named Isaac, 24 years old, born on the plantation and known for his physical strength and steady temperament. She summoned him to the main house on a March evening in 1847, after the other workers retired. What happened that night was recorded in Catherine's journal only as, first planting completed with rootstock 1. Weather clear and mild. 3 weeks later, she summoned him again, then twice more before the month ended. By April, Catherine was confident she was pregnant. She recorded this with the same detachment she might note planting cotton, initial cultivation successful. Anticipate harvest in December. Richard Thornhill first suspected something was wrong with his stepmother in late May 1847. He noticed she had stopped her morning rides, claiming the heat bothered her, though the Georgia summer had barely begun. She took meals in her room more often and dismissed the house servant who usually attended her, preferring to manage alone. For a woman as concerned with appearances as Catherine, this withdrawal was unusual. But a conversation Richard overheard in early June truly alarmed him. Hidden behind a tall bookcase in the library, he listened as Catherine met with Miriam Grayson in the adjacent parlor. Mrs. Grayson was the local midwife, a sharp-featured woman of 50 who attended births for both white and enslaved families throughout Burke County. Richard knew her slightly. She had a reputation as skilled but discreet. Absolutely. You're certain of your condition, Mrs. Thornhill? Mrs. Grayson asked in her clipped tone. Quite certain, Catherine replied. I should think sometime in early December. And Mr. Thornhill passed in February, you said. There was a pause. Richard pressed against the bookcase, hardly breathing. My late husband and I were intimate in January, Catherine said evenly. Shortly before his final illness. Of course, Mrs. Grayson's voice held careful neutrality. I'll need to examine you properly, and we should discuss arrangements for the delivery. Will you want me here at the house? I will. And I'll need your discretion, Miriam. Absolutely. You have it, as always. Richard waited until both women left before emerging. His hands shook. The mathematics didn't work. His father had been bedridden all of January, barely conscious, racked with fever. Richard had sat with him many nights. There had been no possibility of intimate relations, which meant Catherine's child had been conceived after Jonathan's death, in March or April, with someone else. The implication sickened him. If word got out Catherine had conceived a child out of wedlock, scandal would destroy the family's remaining reputation. Creditors would seize the property. The Danforths would disown her. But beyond practical consequences, Richard was appalled by the deception itself. Catherine intended to claim this child as his father's legitimate heir, to lie to everyone, to build her future on fraud. He considered his options. Confront Catherine directly. He was only 16, and she held all legal authority. Go to lawyer Talbert in Waynesboro. Without proof, it was his word against hers, and as a minor, his testimony carried little weight. Write to his grandfather Danforth in Augusta. Catherine read all outgoing mail. Instead, Richard began watching Catherine carefully, looking for evidence. He noticed she summoned Isaac to the main house regularly, always after dark, always when the overseer was away or occupied. He saw how Catherine's manner toward Isaac differed, not kind, exactly, but less overtly hostile. She spoke to him in full sentences, not curt commands. By July, Richard was certain Isaac was the father. The realization filled him with horror, not just at the violation of social and legal boundaries, but at what it revealed about Catherine's character. She had coldly, deliberately chosen to conceive a child with an enslaved man, claim that child as her late husband's, and maintain this lie indefinitely. What kind of woman was capable of such calculated deception? He found part of the answer in early August, during one of Catherine's rare trips to Waynesboro. Searching for legal documents, Richard discovered a leather-bound journal hidden in a locked drawer of Catherine's writing desk. The lock was simple enough to pick. The journal was written in cipher, but Richard was good with puzzles. It took him 3 days, working in secret, to crack the substitution pattern. What he read made his blood run cold. Catherine wasn't just having an affair with Isaac. She was implementing a deliberate breeding program. The journal laid it out in chilling detail, her plan to conceive multiple children with selected enslaved men, raise those children as part of the workforce, and eventually breed them with each other and others to create an ever-expanding population genetically tied to Thornhill Estate and to Catherine herself. There were charts, calculations of expected births, notes on desirable physical characteristics, speculation on heritable traits like strength and intelligence. It read like a livestock breeder's manual, except the livestock were human beings. Richard copied several pages, translating cipher into plain English, his hand shaking. This was evidence. Proof of Catherine's depravity. He could take this to the authorities. He could expose her. But that night at dinner, Catherine looked at him with cold green eyes and said casually, "Richard, have you been in my study recently? Some of my papers seem disturbed." "No, ma'am," Richard lied, his throat tight. "I keep certain documents locked away for good reason," Catherine continued, cutting her meat precisely. "If I ever found someone had violated my privacy, broken my trust so fundamentally, I'm afraid I'd have to take serious action. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because family loyalty is everything, Richard. Everything. Without it, we're simply animals tearing at each other." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know you loved your father very much. I would hate for his memory to be tarnished by scandal, especially scandal emerging from within his own household." The threat was clear. If Richard tried to expose her, she would turn it back on him, paint him as a disturbed, resentful stepson inventing lies. Who would people believe? a respected plantation mistress from a prominent family, or an awkward teenage boy with known resentment. Richard returned to his room and burned the copied pages. But he kept watching Catherine. And he began to feel increasingly unwell. It started with fatigue. By September, Richard was exhausted by mid-afternoon, unable to focus. His appetite diminished. He developed frequent headaches. By October, he had muscle weakness and occasional stomach pains. Catherine showed great concern. She insisted he stay in bed, prepared his meals herself, brought him soup and soft foods. She summoned Mrs. Grayson, who diagnosed nervous exhaustion complicated by possible consumption. She prescribed rest, fresh air, and a special tonic Catherine obtained from an Augusta pharmacy. Tuberculosis often strikes young men of sensitive disposition, Catherine told Richard, adjusting his pillows attentively. Your father had a cousin who died of it at just your age. We must be vigilant. Richard knew better. He had read about arsenic poisoning in the library. He recognized the symptoms: fatigue, digestive troubles, muscle weakness. Catherine was slowly killing him, disguising murder as disease, eliminating the one person who knew her secret. But he was too weak to fight, too isolated to get help. The house servants obeyed Catherine absolutely. The overseer rarely came to the main house. Richard's room was on the second floor, and by November, he barely had strength to get out of bed, let alone escape to Waynesboro. He made one final attempt in late November, writing a letter to his grandfather Danforth in Augusta. It took 3 days to compose, working a few minutes at a time before exhaustion overwhelmed him. He described Catherine's breeding program, her journal, the poisoning. He sealed it and gave it to a young house servant named Pearl, begging her to post it in Waynesboro without telling Catherine. Pearl took the letter, but also told Catherine, terrified of what would happen if the mistress discovered her secret. Catherine read the letter expressionlessly, then burned it in the fireplace in front of Richard. You're very ill, darling, she said softly, almost tenderly. The fever is affecting your mind. You're imagining things that aren't real. It's a mercy, really, that you won't suffer much longer. Richard Thornhill died on December 3, 1847, 3 weeks before his 17th birthday. Dr. Samuel Pritchard from Waynesboro, summoned to record the death, noted consumption as the cause and remarked the young man had wasted away with tragic speed. Catherine wept decorously at the funeral. She wore black for a full year. For days after Richard's burial, Catherine gave birth to a healthy son. She named him Jonathan after her late husband and claimed he was born slightly premature, explaining any timing questions. Few in Burke County thought to count backward from the birth to Catherine's widowhood. Those who did kept speculations to themselves. It wasn't the kind of thing discussed openly. The years between 1848 and 1856 transformed Thornhill Estate in ways that seemed miraculous to outsiders. The plantation, teetering on bankruptcy, slowly regained footing. Cotton production increased. The enslaved workforce grew. Catherine Thornhill earned a reputation as a shrewd, if reclusive, plantation mistress who managed with uncommon efficiency. But that efficiency came at a terrible cost no outsider saw. Catherine gave birth 4 more times between 1848 and 1853, daughters named Eleanor, Abigail, and Margaret, and another son called Samuel. Each birth was attended only by Miriam Grayson, now deeply complicit. The midwife received generous payment and silence, regular fees exceeding normal rates, plus a small cottage on the edge of Thornhill property rent-free. Mrs. Grayson's role extended beyond delivering Catherine's children. She performed a darker function, ensuring enslaved women on the property only gave birth to children fitting Catherine's plans. When pregnancies occurred outside controlled pairings, as they did, because human beings form attachments even in oppression, Mrs. Grayson provided abortifacients, plant-based compounds inducing miscarriages. She performed these in a small room behind the overseer's cottage, away from witnesses. Women subjected to forced abortions rarely spoke of them, even to each other. The trauma was profound, the grief unvoiceable in a system already denying bodily autonomy. But whispers circulated. Stories of women pregnant 1 week, bleeding the next, told they'd lost babies naturally, though everyone knew Mrs. Grayson was involved. One woman named Ruth tried to resist. In spring 1851, she was 5 months pregnant when Catherine discovered the father wasn't the designated man, but a young field hand named Samuel, with whom Ruth had formed genuine attachment. Catherine ordered Mrs. Grayson to terminate the pregnancy immediately. Ruth ran. She made it nearly 4 miles into pine forest southwest of the plantation before the overseer's dogs tracked her down. She was dragged back, held down by 2 men while Mrs. Grayson forcibly administered abortifacient compounds. Ruth survived physically, but something fundamental broke inside. She worked mechanically after, spoke rarely, and died 2 years later during a fever outbreak sweeping the quarters. She was 24. But Ruth's tragedy was one among many. By 1856, Catherine's program had produced 7 children of her own, raised in a peculiar liminal space. Legally enslaved, Catherine registered them as children born to enslaved women, giving her legal ownership. They lived in the main house, wore decent clothes, ate better food, and received informal education from Catherine herself. Young Jonathan, the eldest, was 8 in 1856. A serious, quiet child resembling Catherine strongly, same green eyes, auburn hair, sharp features. He had no memory of his father, Isaac, sold to an Alabama plantation in 1849. Catherine found Isaac's presence a complication once his purpose was served. Money from his sale helped pay down debts. The younger children knew nothing of their true parentage. Catherine told them they were fortunate orphans she took in from Christian charity. She taught them to read and write, a dangerous illegality in Georgia, where teaching enslaved people literacy was prohibited. But Catherine was confident no outsider would ever enter her home and discover this. She was grooming them for the next phase of her plan. But that phase required patience. The children needed physical maturity before breeding. Catherine continued meticulous record-keeping, tracking growth, health, temperaments. She noted which showed strength, intelligence, compliance. She planned pairings decades ahead. Meanwhile, she continued having children of her own. 3 more were born between 1854 and 1856, sons named William and Henry, and a daughter called Caroline. Each had a different father carefully selected from enslaved men on the property. Catherine's criteria were ruthlessly practical: physical health, strength, decent teeth, good eyesight, no obvious impairments. She cared nothing for personalities or characters. They were, in her mind, genetic material to be utilized. The men themselves had no choice. When Catherine summoned them to the main house, they came, knowing refusal meant brutal punishment or sale. Some understood what was happening, that Catherine's children would be their biological offspring, raised to think of Catherine as benefactor and savior. The psychological torture was extreme. They were forced to become fathers to children they could never acknowledge, parent, or protect. One man named Thomas was summoned in 1855. He was 26, married to a woman named Hannah in the quarters. Hannah was pregnant with their first child. When Thomas learned Catherine intended to use him for breeding, he tried to refuse. The overseer, a brutal man named Virgil Kane, had Thomas whipped before the assembled enslaved population, 39 lashes scarring his back for life. Then Catherine had him brought to the main house anyway. Thomas complied. He had no choice. He never spoke to Hannah about what happened, and Hannah never asked. Some knowledge was too poisonous to voice. By 1856, Thornhill Estate housed a population normal on surface, but structured along Catherine's twisted logic. There were field workers, about 20 adults and their children, working cotton and corn under supervision. House servants, 3 women and 1 elderly man, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the domestic space. And Catherine's special children, 10 total by 1856, ages 8 down to infancy. These children occupied a strange hierarchy. Other enslaved people resented their privileges but pitted what they represented. Everyone in the quarters understood on some level what Catherine was doing. They didn't have language for eugenics or breeding programs, those terms came later, but they recognized the pattern. They saw Catherine's detailed records, periodic measurements, notations in her locked journal. They waited with horrified anticipation for what would happen when these children grew up. Because everyone knew Catherine's intention. She made it clear in subtle comments and instructions. These children were being raised to produce the next generation of workers, tools in her long-term plan to create a workforce that could never leave, never be sold, because genetically bound to her and Thornhill Estate. It was an abomination disguised as innovation. But in the isolated world of a rural Georgia plantation in the 1850s, with no outside oversight and absolute power concentrated in the property owner, Catherine pursued her vision without interference. The only potential threat was lawyer Talbert in Waynesboro, handling estate legal affairs with access to records raising questions. But Talbert was practical, valuing profitable clients. By 1856, Thornhill Estate was becoming profitable. Cotton yields improved. The workforce grew through Catherine's breeding program at no acquisition cost. Debts were paid down. Talbert asked no uncomfortable questions because he benefited from Catherine's success. Isolation helped maintain secrecy. Thornhill Estate was 7 miles from Waynesboro, connected by a rough road often impassable in winter. Neighbors were few, the nearest plantation 3 miles away. Catherine rarely entertained visitors, discouraged social calls. When interacting with other plantation families, usually at church Sundays or occasional gatherings in Waynesboro, she presented as a proper widow managing her late husband's property with Christian virtue and practical wisdom. No one suspected systematic horror behind whitewashed brick walls and in quarters beyond oaks. And even if they had, would they have cared? This was Georgia in the 1850s, a society built on brutal exploitation of enslaved labor. Catherine's program was more systematic, more coldly calculated than most, but not fundamentally different in kind from thousands of other plantations across the South. That was perhaps the most disturbing aspect. Catherine's breeding program was monstrous, but logical within a framework already treating human beings as property to be bought, sold, and bred at will. She simply took slavery's underlying logic to one of its most horrifying conclusions. But systems built on profound injustice contain seeds of their own destruction. Change was coming to Georgia and the entire South, though in 1856 few could imagine how soon or violently it would arrive. The late 1850s brought increasing tensions to Burke County and all Georgia. The question of slavery's expansion into new territories dominated national politics. Violence in Kansas Territory, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers killed each other, was discussed anxiously at the Waynesboro courthouse. The 1856 presidential election putting James Buchanan in office did little to resolve conflicts tearing the country apart. Catherine paid little attention to politics. Her focus remained Thornhill Estate and her long-term program. By 1859, her eldest children approached adolescence. Jonathan was 11, Eleanor 10, Abigail 9. They were still too young for breeding, but she made preparations, selecting which enslaved young women would be appropriate partners when time came. During this period, Catherine constructed what she called the Heritage Room, in a previously unused section of the mansion's east wing. She told house servants it was storage for family records and memorabilia. In reality, it was a shrine to her breeding program. The room was windowless, lit by oil lamps, walls lined with shelves, a large table center. On shelves, Catherine stored coded journals, 3 leather-bound volumes by 1859, chronicling every birth, pairing, observation on children's development. She kept small glass vials, each labeled with name and date, containing locks of hair from each child. These samples were arranged in rows by generation and parentage, a physical archive of genetic experiments. On the table, Catherine drew elaborate ink family trees, showing not actual relationships but planned pairings for future generations. Lines connected names with notations: strong constitution, good teeth, intelligent, compliant temperament. It looked like breeding charts for show dogs or racehorses, except names were human. Abigail paired with Thomas's son, Jacob. Eleanor with Isaac's son, Marcus, to be born 1862. Margaret with Samuel's nephew, Peter. Catherine spent hours here, planning decades ahead, imagining Thornhill Estate populated by 100 or more workers, all descended from her, all genetically and psychologically bound to the land. In her mind, she created something revolutionary, a plantation never facing labor shortages, never requiring expensive purchases, never risking mass escapes because the enslaved population had nowhere else to go. They were family in the most literal sense. Practical implementation required tighter control over plantation social structures. She began separating children into groups based on roles in her program. Special children, her biological offspring, continued living in or near the main house. Other enslaved children were kept distant, sleeping in quarters, working fields when old enough. But Catherine needed these other children, too, necessary for genetic mixing. So she implemented subtle manipulation, offering small privileges to families cooperating with pairings, threatening separation and sale to those resisting. Psychological pressure was immense and constant. A woman named Violet, mother of 3, found herself in an impossible position. In 1860, Catherine decided Violet's eldest daughter, 14-year-old Sarah, should be paired with an older field hand, 30-something Elijah. Sarah was terrified, still a child, Elijah old enough to be her father. Violet begged Catherine to wait, give Sarah more time. Catherine's response was cold. "You have 2 younger daughters, Violet. Would you prefer I sell them to settle this? Or will Sarah do her duty to this estate and to you?" Sarah was paired with Elijah that autumn. She gave birth to a daughter 9 months later and died from delivery complications. She was 15. Violet never recovered. She worked mechanically, spoke to no one, and in 1862 walked into the Savannah River and drowned. But tragedies like Sarah and Violet's were invisible to outsiders. When rare visitors came, they saw a well-managed plantation with neat fields, substantial house, and workforce appearing adequately fed and housed. Horror was carefully hidden, buried in quarters, locked in heritage room, encoded in journals. Then came 1860, and everything changed. Abraham Lincoln was elected president. South Carolina seceded in December. Georgia followed in January 1861, delegates at the Milledgeville Secession Convention voting 208 to 89 to leave the United States and join the Confederate States of America. War came in April with firing on Fort Sumter. Initially, many Georgians believed it a short conflict, a few months, perhaps a year, and Confederacy would establish independence. But war dragged through 1861 into 1862, 1863. Young men from Burke County marched to fight in Virginia and Tennessee. Some returned in coffins, others didn't return. The war disrupted Catherine's plans in unanticipated ways. Overseer Virgil Kane enlisted in Confederate Army in 1861, killed at Shiloh April 1862. Finding replacement was difficult, most able-bodied white men away at war. Catherine eventually hired elderly Silas Kendrick, too old for military service. Kendrick was less brutal than Kane but less effective maintaining discipline and control. The enslaved population at Thornhill began sensing shifting power dynamics. News filtered through slave networks connecting plantations across Georgia, whispered Union victories, rumors Lincoln issued proclamation freeing enslaved people in Confederate territory, speculation on what would happen if Yankees came south. Catherine tightened control as best she could. She confined enslaved population to plantation, forbidding anyone leaving even to visit relatives on neighboring properties. She increased rations slightly, reducing temptation to run. And she accelerated breeding program, pushing some children into pairings earlier than originally planned. Jonathan, her eldest son, turned 15 December 1862. Catherine decided he was ready. She selected young woman named Rachel, 16, daughter of a field hand. Rachel had no say. In February 1863, Catherine arranged Jonathan and Rachel married, in ceremony she conducted in Main House, a mockery with no legal standing, giving veneer of respectability to breeding pairing. Jonathan, raised isolated from other enslaved people, taught to think Catherine his benefactor, accepted without question. He had no understanding of what had been done, no awareness Catherine was his biological mother, no sense of profound wrongness. Rachel, traumatized into silence, said nothing. But others in quarters watched. They saw Catherine pairing special children, ones raised in Main House, with other enslaved young people. They understood this was next phase of Catherine's plan. Quiet, desperate rage began building, rage with nowhere to go until circumstances shifted. Spring 1863 brought terrible news to Burke County. Confederate losses mounted. Union Army controlled Mississippi River after Vicksburg fall. In July, Lee's Pennsylvania invasion ended disaster at Gettysburg. Shortages of food, cloth, basic supplies made life increasingly difficult even for white plantation families. For enslaved population, conditions harsher still as Catherine rationed everything more severely. But something else happened at Thornhill Estate, something Catherine tried desperately hiding from outside world. The children she bred and raised were becoming aware of true parentage. It began with Eleanor, Catherine's second-born daughter, now 14. She was most observant, asking uncomfortable questions. In May 1863, helping Catherine organize study papers, Eleanor discovered a coded journal carelessly left unlocked. Eleanor learned reading from Catherine herself. Intelligent, curious, bored with limited reading material, the cipher intrigued her. She spent 3 weeks working secretly, same way Richard had 16 years earlier, slowly decoding substitution pattern. What she found destroyed her understanding of entire existence. The journal detailed her conception, second planting with rootstock 2. Thomas age 21. Excellent physical specimen. Strong back. Good teeth. Weather warm and humid. Anticipate harvest late October 1848. Eleanor read entry again and again, hands shaking. Rootstock 2. Thomas. She knew Thomas, a quiet field hand in his 30s who never made eye contact. He was her father. Catherine was her mother. She wasn't an orphan raised from charity. She was product of Catherine's deliberate breeding experiment. Implications cascaded through Eleanor's mind. If true for her, true for Jonathan, Abigail, all children brought into Maine House. They were Catherine's biological children, conceived with enslaved men, lied to entire lives. Worse, journal laid Catherine's plans for their futures. Eleanor read notations on pairings, anticipated offspring, creation of self-sustaining workforce. She saw her name in a chart connected by line to Marcus, Isaac's son, to be born 1862. Pairing with Eleanor anticipated 1865. Eleanor felt physically sick. Catherine intended pairing her with a boy not yet born, forcing her to have children enslaved forever, turning her into another breeding tool. She confronted Catherine that night, voice shaking rage and horror. I read your journal. I know what you are. I know what I am. Catherine's face went still, ice cold as winter. You should not have done that, Eleanor. You're my mother. Thomas is my father, and you've been planning to breed us like animals. Eleanor barely forced words out. Sit down, Catherine commanded. No. Sit down. Threat unmistakable. Eleanor sat, whole body trembling. Catherine paced, mind working through problem Eleanor represented. Finally, you're intelligent enough to understand our position. I'll speak plainly. Yes, I am your biological mother. Yes, I implemented systematic program creating self-sustaining workforce. And yes, you and others will participate when come of age. I won't, Eleanor said, but voice lacked conviction. You will, because alternative is worse. Catherine leaned forward, face inches from Eleanor's. Right now, you live in this house. You eat good food, wear decent clothes, read and write. What happens if you refuse? I sell you. Sell you to Alabama or Mississippi plantation working field hands to death in 5 years, where women brutalized as matter of course, where literacy earns whipping or worse. Is that what you want? Eleanor said nothing, tears streaming. I thought not. Catherine straightened. You will not speak of this to brothers or sisters. Not to anyone in quarters. Continue life exactly as before. When time comes fulfilling role in this family's future, you will. Understand? Yes, Eleanor whispered. But Catherine made critical error, revealing truth without adequately controlling information. Eleanor did speak to others, not immediately, but gradually, carefully. She told Jonathan first, showing memorized journal entries. Jonathan's reaction differed. Thoroughly conditioned by Catherine, completely isolated from alternative understanding, he struggled seeing wrong with Catherine's plan. She gave us better life, Jonathan said, confused by Eleanor's anger. We could be working fields. Instead, we're here. We're property, Jonathan. We're slaves. Our own mother enslaved us. She's protecting us. Keeping us together. If sold, we'd separate, sent different places. This way, we stay together. Stay at Thornhill. Eleanor realized with horror Jonathan successfully indoctrinated. He couldn't see cage Catherine built. But Abigail, 13 and sharp as glass, understood immediately when told. Margaret, 12, understood too. Younger children still too young fully grasp. But older ones knew now. They knew what they were, what Catherine intended. Knowledge changed atmosphere in main house. Catherine felt it, shift in air, way children looked at her. Fear, yes, but something else. Calculation. Waiting. They bided time, and Catherine knew. She considered options. Sell older children, eliminate problem. Waste years investment and planning. Punish severely enough breaking spirits. Physical brutality might damage interfering with breeding program. She needed them healthy, capable bearing children. So Catherine chose different approach, demonstrate disobedience consequences through someone else. In August 1863, young woman named Grace tried running away. 17, pregnant, desperate. Paired with field hand against will, she couldn't bear bringing child into system. She ran at night, east toward Savannah River, hoping cross into South Carolina, make way to Union lines. Caught within 12 hours. Dogs tracked to creek 3 miles from Plantation. Brought back, locked in outbuilding. Next morning, Catherine assembled everyone, all enslaved people, including special children from main house, in yard between quarters and mansion. Grace brought out, hands tied. Catherine stood on main house porch, expressionless. This woman attempted abandoning responsibilities to estate and all of you. Attempted destroying family we built. Penalty for such betrayal must be severe. What followed brutal. Grace whipped publicly, 20 lashes administered by elderly overseer Kendrick, grim reluctance. Catherine made all children watch, including biological offspring. Message clear, this happens to those trying leave. But Catherine miscalculated again. Public punishment didn't terrify into submission. Instead, clarified something. Catherine willing extreme violence maintaining control meant she was afraid. If afraid, they had more power than realized. Whispers circulated through quarters weeks after. Whispers about waiting right moment. Whispers about what happened when war ended, surely end, surely Yankees come south, surely things change. All they had do survive until then. Eleanor heard whispers. She began spending time near quarters when Catherine not watching, developing relationships with other enslaved people kept separate entire life. She learned things Catherine never told, about Father Thomas, other men Catherine used, women died or broken by program. One evening October, Eleanor met older enslaved women in woods beyond quarters. They sat circled darkness, speaking low. Woman named Hope, 40s, looked Eleanor with something between pity and respect. Your mama. Thinks she made something special here. Thinks she made family. But all she did make people hate her ways she can't understand. What happens when war ends? Eleanor asked. Depends who wins, Hope replied. Yankees win, we're free. Confederates win, things stay same or worse. But either way, your mama can't keep doing what she been. Too many people know. Too many people angry. Something got break. What if we made it break? Eleanor asked. Women looked surprised. Hope leaned forward. What you saying, child? What if we didn't wait war to end? What if we ended this ourselves? Idea hung air, dangerous intoxicating. Younger woman, Anna, spoke, you talking running. Taking everyone running. Or fighting. Before Eleanor responded, footsteps crashed underbrush. Everyone scattered, melting darkness. Eleanor ran toward main house, heart pounding, wondering if someone heard, if Catherine find out, if everything collapse. But no punishment came. Next day passed normally, day after. Seemed escaped detection. But seed planted. Idea they didn't have passively wait external forces freeing them. They could act themselves. That idea spread through quarters like fever. Catherine sensed change but couldn't identify source. She increased surveillance, had Kendrick patrol quarters night, restricted movement further. Tension grew thicker each week, like watching storm build horizon. Dark clouds massing, electricity charging air, everyone waiting lightning strike. Break came March 1864, not way anyone expected. Confederate cavalry unit came through Burke County, requisitioning supplies from plantations, food, horses, cloth, anything useful war effort. Catherine had no choice comply. Provided corn, preserved meat, 2 plantations' best horses. Soldiers stayed one night, camped fields beyond quarters, departed dawn. But presence had consequences. Soldiers spoke openly war progress, news bad Confederacy. Sherman pushing through Georgia. Union forces closing multiple directions. Some spoke fatalistically war lost, going home, impossibility maintaining fight much longer. Enslaved population at Thornhill heard every word. Hope surged through quarters. Freedom coming, months or weeks, but coming. All they had to hold little longer. Except Catherine, sensing hope terrified meaning long-term plans, decided act decisively. If Confederacy fell, enslaved population freed, everything built collapse. Special children leave. Breeding program end. 16 years work nothing. She couldn't allow. Night March 17, 1864, Catherine gathered biological children in main house, Jonathan, Eleanor, Abigail, Margaret, Samuel, William, Henry, Caroline, 3 youngest still infants, 11 children total, 16 years down 6 months. Things going change very soon, Catherine told them, voice calm but eyes intense. War may end badly. Yankees may come. May be attempts taking you from me, destroying family. I cannot allow. Eleanor felt ice slide spine. What planning? We securing future, Catherine said. Tonight. She led them heritage room east wing, room none except Jonathan ever allowed enter. Catherine lit oil lamps illuminating journal shelves, hair sample vials, elaborate family trees pinned walls. This our legacy, Catherine said. This what built together, no one taking. From locked cabinet, Catherine withdrew small wooden box. Inside, several glass bottles clear liquid. This medicine called laudanum. Small doses relief pain. Larger doses eternal peace. Abigail gasped. Want poison us? Want protect you, Catherine corrected, voice edge desperation. If Yankees come, free others, where go? Not white enough live white society. Not fully black their eyes either. Outcasts, owned no one, belonging nowhere. That better staying here, together, with me. Yes, Eleanor said firmly. Anything better this. Catherine's face hardened. Too young understand. All too young. But I mother, no best family. She moved toward bottles, but Jonathan stepped between her others. 16, nearly tall Catherine, something face changed. No, he said quietly. Jonathan, don't foolish. Understand plan. Always understood. Understood what told me, Jonathan said. But Eleanor showed journals. Reed wrote us, Father Isaac, Father Thomas, all them. Know what did. Know what are. I mother. Monster, Jonathan said, voice broke word. Catherine slapped him, sharp crack echoing small room. How dare. After everything given, everything sacrificed. Sacrificed nothing, Eleanor said, stepping forward beside Jonathan. Used people. Destroyed them. Destroyed us. Catherine looked children, seeing clearly perhaps first time. United against her. Even younger, not fully understanding, sensed confrontation stood older siblings. Lost them. Moment, Catherine made final desperate decision. If couldn't keep children, if reject, leave, destroy everything built, at least preserve record accomplished. Future generations know Catherine Thornhill created, even creation failed. She grabbed journals, charts, hair sample vials, clutching chest. Think escape me. Think pretend none happened. These records survive. Prove built here. Prove right. She pushed past children, ran room carrying physical evidence crimes. Jonathan Eleanor chased, but Catherine faster, driven manic energy. Ran through main house, front door, across yard toward quarters. What happened next depended who asked. Multiple testimonies later conflict, each remembering events slightly differently, shaped trauma perspective. Certain, Catherine reached quarters carrying journal specimens. Certain, enslaved population, roused commotion, emerged cabins see mistress tormented 16 years running toward darkness clutching evidence atrocities. Certain, someone, maybe hope, maybe one man, maybe several once, decided moment. When ended. Catherine Thornhill disappeared night. Journals found scattered mud outside quarters, pages torn muddy. Hair sample vials smashed. Charts burned. Catherine simply gone. Jonathan Eleanor reaching quarters minutes after mother found chaos. People shouting, running directions, acrid smoke smell where someone lit fire burning Catherine's papers. But no Catherine. Where she? Jonathan demanded. Hope looked expression couldn't read. Gone. All need know. Gone ain't coming back. What did her? What had coming, Hope said simply. Now got choice, boy. Raise hell mama, or understand justice done tonight let rest. Jonathan looked Eleanor. Sister's face pale, eyes wide, but nodded slowly. Let rest, whispered. Next morning, Catherine Thornhill reported missing. Old Kendrick searched property, found nothing. Reported disappearance Sheriff Waynesboro, who came investigate but concluded Mrs. Thornhill likely fled area fear advancing Union forces, reasonable assumption given deteriorating military situation. No one quarter spoke happened. Jonathan Eleanor other children said nothing. Official record states Catherine Thornhill disappeared night March 17, 1864, never seen again. But everyone Thornhill estate knew truth, even never spoke aloud. Catherine killed night. Body disposed somewhere Plantation's 1,700 acres. Children, biological offspring, breeding experiments, legacy, chose let murderers unpunished because understood mother earned fate. War ended 14 months later. General Sherman's army swept Georgia late 1864, though past 30 miles north Burke County never came directly Thornhill estate. Confederacy collapsed April 1865. Freedom came enslaved population Georgia through combination military occupation, 13th Amendment, simple fact bondage system no longer maintained. Thornhill estate transition complicated. Jonathan, Catherine's eldest child, some legal claim property, but status ambiguous, legally enslaved Georgia law but Catherine's biological heir. Lawyer Talbert Waynesboro tried sort mess, eventually gave up. Property fell legal limbo. Most formerly enslaved left Thornhill within weeks emancipation. Scattered across Georgia beyond, seeking family members sold years before, looking opportunity cities, simply putting distance between themselves sight suffering. Some stayed initially. Hope remained, helping organize those nowhere go. Thomas stayed, Eleanor's biological father finally, after 16 years, Abel acknowledged daughter openly. They had one conversation Catherine, what done him Eleanor, then never spoke again. Pain too deep, tangled fundamental wrongness entire situation. Eleanor stayed Thornhill until 1867. Learned years after war exist free person, though psychological damage childhood never fully healed. Eventually moved Savannah, worked seamstress, married carpenter William Foster. Never had children. Never spoke publicly. Mother childhood. Died 1903, obituary Northwest mentioned Thornhill Estate, Burke County. Jonathan stayed plantation longer, trying work land. Small group freedmen remained. But cotton market depressed, soil exhausted, property's reputation begun spread. Black community, Burke County. By 1869, Jonathan gave up, abandoned estate. Drifted west, eventually settled Texas. Assumed name. Died 1891, few possessions included small notebook written over tiny script. I did not choose this. I did not choose this. I did not choose this. Thornhill Estate decayed rapidly. Main house partially burned. Suspicious fire 1871. Remaining structures fell ruin. Land eventually seized. Unpaid taxes, sold. Auction 1878. Timber company clearing old-growth trees, dividing parcels. But 1871, something discovered brought entire story back. Public attention, briefly. Well driller working neighboring property accidentally broke old cistern. Thornhill land. Inside, 30 feet below ground, skeleton. Remains mostly intact, preserved. Cool dry conditions. Woman, probably 30s 40s. Scrap cloth suggested 1860s dress. Corroded metal locket near skeleton contained 2 miniature portraits, man young boy. Coroner Waynesboro examined remains, concluded woman died blunt force trauma. Skull. Skeleton buried unmarked grave. County cemetery. Official record identified, unknown female discovered. Former Thornhill property, 1871. But people. Burke County black community knew who. Story passed. Whispers. Kitchens. Churches, encoded language protecting those present. Night, March 1864. New Catherine Thornhill killed people, enslaved, brutalized. New body hidden deep well cistern. New justice kind done. Years, more information emerged, always fragmentary, incomplete. 1889, men deathbed. Alabama confessed minister helped murder former mistress. Georgia during war. Provided no name details, but minister noted confession records. 1902, woman Savannah, Hope's granddaughter, wrote short memoir mentioning night devil mistress disappeared. Nobody mourned. Most damning evidence came light. 1923, historian researching Burke County Civil War history discovered cache letters. Courthouse basement. Among them, letter written 1865. Union Captain Samuel Reynolds, commanded 1st Federal units entering Burke County after war ended. Reynolds wrote, we discovered disturbing evidence. Property called Thornhill Estate, indication systematic breeding experiments conducted. Late owner upon enslaved persons, including own biological offspring. Details too grotesque relate. Full, but multiple witnesses confirmed. Woman, 1 Catherine Thornhill, implemented program creating self-perpetuating enslaved population through forced reproduction across generations. Witnesses also informed Mrs. Thornhill disappeared March 1864, though not explicitly state occurred, meaning clear enough. I elected not pursue matter further, seems me whatever justice enacted woman well deserved. Directed men say nothing learned here. Asterisk. Letter filed away forgotten until graduate student found 1954 researching dissertation Reconstruction Georgia. Tried verify story, interviewing elderly Burke County residents remembering family stories era. Most claimed know nothing. One woman, 93, great-granddaughter enslaved person Thornhill, said only, some things happened needed happen. Some people did things needed doing, all needs said. Final mystery. Thornhill Estate concerns 23 children found locked basement. Federal troops arrived. Captain Reynolds' official report mentions several letters. Soldiers unit. Children freed, placed freedmen families. Burke County surrounding areas. What happened after lost history? Some surely survived adulthood. Some likely had children, meaning probably people alive today. Georgia elsewhere. Carry Catherine Thornhill genetic legacy unknowing. Might descended Jonathan Eleanor other children breeding program. Might carry distinctive features, pale green eyes, auburn hair, sharp cheekbones marking Catherine's offspring. Never know ancestor built legacy. One most calculated systems exploitation cruelty American history. Never know exist because woman decided treat human beings livestock, build dynasty forced reproduction genetic control. Never know great-great-great-grandmother's body lies unmarked grave Burke County, placed people tormented, people names never know because protected each other's secrets even freedom. Thornhill Estate site today Fields Forest. County maintains no historical marker. No books Burke County history mention plantation detail. House foundation visible no look, buried decades leaf fall undergrowth. Old well Catherine's body hidden long collapsed filled earth. But story persists, past oral tradition Burke County black community, whispered genealogy circles, reference to bleakly academic papers slavery eugenics. Persists because represents true terrible American history, not just slavery brutality, but ways human beings rationalize systematize cruelty holding absolute power others. Catherine Thornhill convinced herself building revolutionary, creating new model plantation management, securing family future. Reality, perpetuating intensifying humanity's greatest evils. People exploited, bred controlled tormented, ultimately erased history thoroughly tried erasing humanity. What think story? Believe everything revealed, still secrets buried land Burke County. Truth, may never know full extent happened Thornhill Estate. People lived through, survivors, chose carry secrets graves. Maybe right. Maybe some stories belong people endured, not historians storytellers like me. But honor people remembering resistance mattered, survival mattered, outlasted system designed destroy. If story moved, made think hidden history's own community, let no comments below. Share video someone appreciates deep dives America's darkest chapters. Subscribe channel more stories challenge think no history. Remember, past never far behind like believe. See next video.